Hey there, we're Minidisc, a headphone store here in Australia, and in this video we're going to be comparing the Sennheiser Momentum True Wireless earphones against some of its true wireless competitors, the Technica ATH-CKR7TW, the Bang & Olufsen Beoplay E8, and the Sony WF1000X. Now, we here at the store, we sell all of these earphones and we don't really have an agenda. We want to kind of make sure that you walk home with something that you love. But honestly speaking, when we give these earphones to customers to compare, they have a demo, they have a listen, 90% of the time right now, they're walking away with the Sennheiser Momentum True Wireless. And you know, there's a number of good reasons for its popularity. So before we even get to sound quality, the Momentum True Wireless has an advantage here because it supports Bluetooth 5.0 wireless. And what that means is that compared to the 4.2 Bluetooth on the Sony and the Bang & Olufsen here, it's going to be more stable. You're going to have longer wireless range and less kind of dropouts, which is a big problem with these kind of true wireless earphones. And particularly with the Sony, we have fielded complaints from customers where they do get occasional dropouts, particularly in busy urban areas with a lot of wireless interference. The Bluetooth 5.0 earphones fare better in this regard. And both the Sennheiser and the Technica support Bluetooth 5.0. But the Sennheiser still has one more advantage over the Technica in that besides supporting aptX and AAC transmission protocols, it also supports aptX low latency. So we think the Sennheiser has an advantage here in terms of just the practical reality of using it as a wireless earphone. But then we also get to the kind of sound that these earphones have, and we really do think that the Momentum True Wireless sounds the best out of all of these earphones. The Sennheiser Momentum True Wireless out of the box has a bit of a V-shaped sound signature, and what we mean by that is that it has a little more emphasis in the bass frequencies and the high frequency treble. It's just a little bit of an emphasis to make things sound exciting without sounding unnatural. It doesn't have any sort of unusual peaks and valleys in the kind of frequency response that makes things sound odd. So the bass on this earphone, on the Sennheiser, has a real sense of slam and texture and scale, and the high frequencies have a bit of energy and detail without sounding aggressive or harsh. Now, the Momentum True Wireless shares driver technology with Sennheiser's IE800 flagship earphone. And while it doesn't sound as clean and clear as the IE800 or the IE800S, it does a really, really good job. This is an earphone that we think doesn't have a great deal of compromise in the sound compared to some of these other true wireless earphones. So if we look at the Bang & Olufsen E8, I think that this earphone has a really kind of natural sound out of the box, and I think it's probably the second nicest earphone in this comparison in terms of sound. The one issue I have with the Bang & Olufsen is that out of the box, the sound profile has a little emphasis or a little sibilance in the high frequency region. So it tends to pick up kind of S sounds, it tends to sound a bit spitty and harsh at times, and it really detracts from the overall experience. Now, of course, everyone's hearing is different and it only really happens on some tracks as opposed to every single track, but it is something that I think the Momentum True Wireless does better. I also think the Momentum True Wireless has a kind of tighter bass response compared to the Bang & Olufsen E8. Now, compared to the Technica CKR7TW, it's even more extreme because the Technica has the classic Technica tuning where the mid-bass is just a little warm and then there's an upper mid-range emphasis in the female vocal region. However, with the CKR7TW, I think that emphasis is a little too extreme. And this is coming from someone who really likes Technica products. This particular earphone can tend to sound really harsh and raw in that upper mid-range frequency region. Now, don't get me wrong, we do have customers who do like that emphasis, But again, I think the Momentum True Wireless does sound more natural. And it's a bit of a shame because in other respects, the CKR7TW is quite evenly matched to the Momentum True Wireless. And it also has the longest battery life out of all of these earphones. Now with the Sony WF-1000X, you don't really encounter the same issue with harshness that you do occasionally get with the E8 and the Audio Technica. And that's because the Sony sounds very, very distinctive. It has Sony's new kind of house sound, which means that it has a very thick bass and mid-bass emphasis combined with a peak in the extreme high frequencies that gives everything a sort of shimmery, glossy sound. It's not what I would say is a natural sound signature. It sometimes makes vocals or kind of acoustic instruments sound a little bit odd, but if you like your electronic or your synthetic instruments, you like your pop music, it can sound like a lot of fun. It's just not what I would consider up to the same level of technical quality as the E8 or the Sennheiser Momentum True Wireless. Now the one thing that the Sony does have going for it compared to these other earphones is that it has active noise cancellation compared to these other earphones which just use passive noise isolation like earplugs. The Sony uses microphones and electronics to cancel out background noise. However, because this is a true wireless earphone, you're not going to be able to use this on a lot of airline flights, which is a pretty common scenario that we find customers want active noise cancellation. So if you want a wireless earphone that you can use on an airplane, we usually recommend the Sony WI-1000X, which is kind of like the WF-1000X, except that it comes with a neckband and it comes with a cable that you can plug in and use this as a wired earphone. Again, it supports active noise cancellation and it sounds pretty good. I actually prefer it over the sound of the WF-1000X. So with the stock sound, I think the Momentum True Wireless does sound the best out of all of these earphones, and it has a kind of exciting sound signature without having really a natural emphasis in any particular frequency compared to some of these other earphones. Now both the Sennheiser and the Bang & Olufsen have a smartphone app that lets you adjust the sound profile of the earphone according to your own tastes. But I think out of the box, the Momentum True Wireless is already pretty close to what I would consider my kind of preferred sound signature. With the app, I only have to nudge the bass and the treble down a little bit to make things a bit flatter and a bit more to my preference. Whereas with the E8, I find you really have to wrestle with the sound of this earphone before you get something that doesn't sound quite as brittle in the high frequencies. And no matter how much kind of EQing you do with this earphone, I still think it doesn't have the same level of tightness in the bass frequencies compared to the Momentum True Wireless. So even though the Momentum True Wireless is the most expensive out of all of these true wireless earphones, I think it has the best wireless connectivity compared to all of these earphones, and it has the best sound compared to all of these earphones. And I think the customers agree because this is basically our most popular item during the Christmas sales period. So again, we're Minidisc, a headphone store here in Australia, and you can pop into our Chats with store and have a sort of comparison with all of these earphones, and you can give us your opinion about whether you think this one is the best out of the lot. Ask us any questions you've got in the comments. This is Lachlan for Minidisc TV. I'll see you next time.